our fourth in a series of town halls that we are presenting for New York City and for other cities around the United States. Today is Wednesday, September 6, 2023. I'm Odette Wilkens, and I'm your moderator and host for today's town hall, Internet Broadband Freedom of Choice for every city in the United States. I'm co-founder, president, and general counsel of Wired Broadband, Inc. We are a 501c3 nonprofit in New York City. Our mission is to advocate for wired broadband solutions, including end-to-end fiber optics network architecture, running fiber to and through the premises for homes, businesses, schools, and all facilities. Why? Because fiber optics is superior to wireless for on-premise internet access in every way. High symmetrical download and upload gigabit speeds, safety, cybersecurity, telemedicine, and emergency preparedness. In our town hall of July 19th, entitled Gig City Goes Quantum, we presented the amazing story of Chattanooga, Tennessee's fiber network success, providing superior broadband access to every home and business, and the economic boon that it has brought to the city. We showcased Chattanooga as a broadband blueprint for New York City and other cities in the United States. We now have the pleasure of showcasing another fiber success, Utopia Fiber, and you'll hear all about their amazing story. At the heart of these successes is providing consumers, that means all of us, with the freedom to choose the best internet broadband possible and at the most economical prices. And what's going to do this and bridge the digital divide? Hint, it's not 5G. The telecom industry has been dominating the conversation. This topic is very timely, especially with the large number of federal bills giving virtual free rein to the telecom industry, to the unconstrained proliferation of wireless cell towers and how close they can place them to our homes. It's more like an avalanche of bills, resembling more like what I would imagine is the telecom industry's Christmas wish list. Case in point, there is growing and successful opposition against the irresponsible proliferation of 5G facilities or towers in New York City and across the country. For instance, in New York City, there are 16 advisory councils to the New York City administration called community boards, which have disapproved or called for moratoria on the installation of 5G towers in their districts. That already represents an average of 2 million New York City residents. That's a quarter of the New York City population. The message is clear. They don't need the 5G towers and they don't want them. Those federal bills with surgical precision are chiseling away at these successes. In the House bill in Congress, HR 3557, there is an express prohibition against moratoria, which has been so successful in New York City. Now we will hear from our panel of experts on how to, as the expression goes, take back our power, because there is a better way. We're absolutely delighted to have a distinguished panel of experts with us for this town hall. Gigi Sohn, Executive Director, American Association of Public Broadband, and who President Biden had nominated for commissioner to the Federal Communications Commission. Kimberly, McKinley, Deputy Director and Chief Marketing Officer, Utopia Fiber in Utah. Timothy Schoechle, Ph.D. Consultant in Computer and Communications Engineering and Policy and Senior Research Fellow at the National Institute for Science, Law, and Public Policy. I will be giving their bios just before their presentation. After their presentations, we will be taking questions from the chat. Therefore, please enter your questions in the chat, which will be seen only by me and the panelists. After their presentations, we will be joined by Mr. Clayton, Chief Executive Officer of Silicon Harlem here in New York City. Today's program is being simulcast by the Internet Society of New York. So we want to thank the Internet Society of New York. We also want to thank our co-sponsors who helped us promote this town hall: American Association for Public Broadband, Silicon Harlem, Historic Park Avenue, Broadband International Legal Action Network, Manhattan Neighbors, for safer telecommunications. Mount Morris Park Community Improvement Association in Harlem. Safe Tech Tucson, Alliance for Microwave Radiation Accountability. Californians for Safe Technology. EMF Safety Network, 5G Free California, CLEAR, Citizen League Encouraging Awareness of Radiation, and Longmont for Safe Tech in Colorado. Now to our panelists. Gigi Sohn is the Executive Director of the American Association of Public Broadband. The association was founded by state and local broadband officials. It is a nonprofit organization that will build a diverse membership of public broadband networks from around the country and advocate in support of municipal broadband and local choice at the federal, state, and local levels. Gigi is also a Benton Institute Senior Fellow and Public Advocate and a Distinguished Fellow at the Georgetown Law Institute for Technology, Law, and Policy. She is one of the nation's leading public advocates for open, affordable, and democratic communications networks. In recognition of her expertise and dedication to the public interest in communications, President Biden nominated Gigi to serve on the Federal Communications Commission in October 2021. From 2013 to 2016, Gigi was counselor to the former FCC chairman, Tom Wheeler, who referred to Gigi as the conscience of the chairman's office for her tireless advocacy on behalf of American consumers and competition. The Daily Dot named Gigi one of the heroes who saved the internet in recognition of her role in the adoption of the FCC's 2015 network neutrality rules. From 2001 to 2013, Gigi served as the co-founder and CEO of Public Knowledge, a leading communications and intellectual property policy advocacy organization serving the interests of consumers in Washington. She was previously a project specialist at the Ford Foundation's Media, Arts, and Culture Unit and executive director of the Media Access Project, the first public interest communications law firm. In 1997, President Clinton appointed Gigi to serve as a member of his advisory council on the public interest obligations of digital television broadcasters. In 2021, the Washingtonian magazine named Gigi one of its most influential people in Washington. Please welcome Gigi Sohn.
Thank you, Odette. I guess by reading my bio, you've shown the entire audience that I'm old. So thanks for that. But I do want to say that I'm very impressed with what you've done and what you've built at Wired Broadband and the community spirit that you're building around broadband issues. Because I think, as I'll talk about later, I do think there's real power at the local level, and you're doing that. So congratulations. I also want to thank the folks who are here. Thanks for tuning in at 4 o'clock on a Wednesday. I hope you will enjoy what I have to say. And I'm just delighted that you guys want to hear from me and my fellow panelists about what's going on with regard to broadband choice. Let me just say a few words about AAPB, if I might, the American Association for Public Broadband. Our goal is to promote and defend community ownership of broadband networks. There are all different kinds of models of broadband, community broadband networks, which I'll talk about later. But the whole thing that brings them together and then brings the organization together is that the community owns the assets. And in the many places where people are dissatisfied with what the incumbents are bringing to the table in terms of universality and affordability, communities have decided, like Chattanooga, like many communities in Utah, which Kim will talk about, to build their own networks. And I'm a huge proponent of that. And as you'll also hear, those networks are often under attack. So AAPB's purpose is to both promote the model. I'd like to double the number of community-owned broadband networks in the next 5 years. There's about 700 now, so we're talking about 1,400. And to make sure that they are free of the kind of oftentimes dirty tricks that are used by certain parties to stop them from being built. So I hope you'll consider joining. The website's aapb.us. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them as well. My email is gbsohn@aapb.us. So let me talk a little bit. I want to make just 3 points. I believe in the rule of 3, so I'm just going to make 3 points I want to make at the outset, and then I'm happy to take any questions. So point number 1, and this plays into what Odette was saying at the beginning. Fiber is king and queen. Now, I know that many folks on this call have been working with Odette on the issue of big and ugly 5G towers being built in the city. I'll talk a bit about that later, but I'm not going to posit an opinion on 5G technology. Generally, I will say that mobile broadband is an important tool in the telecommunications toolbox. That being said, if anyone is telling you that 5G is the answer to closing the digital divide in your community or other communities, they're just trying to sell you on accepting the wrong technology for a big problem. As you know, as many of you know, I'm sure, 5G technology requires close proximity to 5G infrastructure, which means either a lot of ugly towers or a lousy connection. And depending on what type of spectrum a mobile provider uses, that could mean even more towers. And 5G, like all wireless technologies, are subject to interference from weather, solid objects, and competing wireless technologies. So for a connection that you need to be on all the time, it's an imperfect technology. What will close a digital divide, particularly in New York City, is a scalable, future-proof, and robust broadband technology that operates inside the home and connects to a device that can be used to do classwork, meet with your doctor, undertake complex work tasks, operate smoothly with any remote video platform, and allow for multiple users in the home. People kind of forget about this. It's not about one person checking email. It's about a family of 4 all using it at the same time for various and sundry different applications, some which require very, very high bandwidth. And that is fiber broadband, plain and simple, period. I want to emphasize the scalability. 20 years ago, nobody thought we'd need or want more than 1 megabit per second download, right? Nobody even was talking about upload 20 years ago. Now people are clamoring for gigabit symmetrical connectivity, and companies are advertising 2 gig symmetrical and sometimes even more. Only fiber, I think one of the cable companies advertises 10 gigs. I'm not sure, but again, as applications get more complicated, as they get more desirable, they need more bandwidth. And so the notion that, I've heard people say, 25 down, 3 up, which is the FCC's definition, that's plenty. Well, it isn't if you want to upload anything of any consequence to the internet, and even the download speed isn't enough. And again, if you have multiple users, you need much, much, much more. Only fiber has the capability to continue to scale as user demand for more broad bandwidth and faster speeds grow. Now, I understand that there are some communities where fiber is not economically or geographically feasible. But I want to emphasize that is a tiny, tiny minority of communities in the United States. Maybe the one person up in the mountain or some remote places in Alaska, but that's really is the minority. Congress has already spent tens of billions of dollars on broadband and is about to spend, or the states are about to spend, over $42.5 billion more. And it has said, right in the plain language of the infrastructure law, which I have read many times, that it wants robust and scalable broadband. That is fiber. 2, every community should have the freedom to choose what broadband network or networks best serve their needs. And this is obviously the theme of this entire program. Well, unfortunately, it isn't the case in every state, and Kim will probably talk about that a little more. In New York, there's nothing stopping a town or city from building or partnering to build its own fiber broadband network. As I mentioned before, there are a variety of community-owned broadband networks. For example, Chattanooga already had a utility, and they figured, hey, we're already providing electricity, we can provide fiber as well. Other cities like Fairlawn, Ohio, built it from scratch. I mean, they just They built it, they operate it, they own it, the whole 9 yards. In other communities, like where Kim operates, Utopia Fiber is the builder, it's not the owner, but it builds and operates the network, and it partners with communities in order for those communities to own those networks and get the networks that they want. So particularly if you don't believe that the incumbent provider is delivering your community the universality, speed, and price your community wants and needs, you should consider your community owning its own network. Now, maybe the incumbent is doing a great job and has a great program that makes broadband affordable and has very fast speeds, and that's wonderful. Okay, I'm not here to beat up on the incumbents. Yeah, they beat up on me in my nominations process, but I'm not going to return the favor today. But your community should make that choice, not the federal or state government or the incumbent broadband provider. So let me give an example, and Kim has lived this, but I think it's a great example and one that I was very active in a little city about 15 miles north of Salt Lake City, where I was just a few weeks ago. It's called Bountiful City. And their city council decided by a 5-0 decision, and this was, again, built up by grassroots support in the community, to build a community-owned network. Well, they partner with Utopia to build and operate, but they would own the network. And they went through a three-year process, putting out requests for proposals, doing feasibility studies. But what they did first was they asked the incumbents, will you build, this is the network we want, this is the affordability we need, this is the universality we need, this is the fiber we need. Will you build it for us? I'm not going to name the names of the companies. You can read my op-ed in the Salt Lake Tribune if you want to see those. But they said, nah, not interested. So what they did was they partnered with a dark money group called the Utah Taxpayer Association that basically went door to door. They hired a group called Gather Utah, who gets paid for putting signatures on petitions. You know how you go to the grocery store and somebody says, here's something wonderful. This is rainbows and unicorns. Please sign this petition, and you do it. So they went door to door in Bountiful City and said, we're from the government, which was a lie. And we support the fiber project, which was a lie. And people signed this petition. And it took an enormous effort by the city and Utopia to get people to actually take their names off the petition. The petition would have actually forced a vote in November. So just to say that the decision was made, was it in May or June to move forward? Shovels were supposed to go in the ground in July, and in late June, these signature gatherers had gathered enough signatures to stop the project and possibly delay it by 8 months. But through the efforts of the city council, the residents, and Utopia, they got enough people to take their names off the petition that the petition failed. So I think shovels went into the ground just a few weeks ago in August, and we're really, really excited to see what happens in Bountiful City. The third and final point I want to make is that local communities and their residents have great power to dictate the broadband future. Now, I know this, look, I'm frustrated with the federal government too, right? But there's a lot of power. Community networks come into being basically two ways that I found, and Kim can correct me on this. One way is you get a local official or a leader in the community who gets a wild hair and says, what we have here is inadequate, and we're going to build a network. And this happened in a little town of 10,000 people, 75 miles west of Baltimore, called Westminster. And so 10,000 people and 5 times more corn. And it's a great little place. And no incumbent would serve them. The city council begged I think Verizon and Comcast, please, could you build us a network? And they said, no, you guys are too small. We're not going to get a big enough return on investment. So a local leader named Dr. Robert Wack, and he is a doctor with a little bit of tech experience, said, you know what? He was on the county council. He said, we're going to build a middle mile open access network. And that's exactly what they did. It really was almost by force, of his power of personality and his persistence that they did it. Now, it was an open access network, meaning that, any ISP could join on, but I think because it's 10,000 people, they only have one ISP, Ting, which provides super fast fiber service for a very low price. But again, before that, they had nothing. So it was definitely upgrade, and particularly an upgrade in the speed and the robustness. The other way is, as I said before, grassroots, and Bountiful City is a perfect example of where residents in the community started basically, a citizens group that pushed the city council to proceed with a program to get a community network. So there is power in the individual, and the individual is joining together to exercise broadband choice. So grassroots, as I said, is really, really very, very important. The larger point is that, again, the residents of communities in New York, and perhaps, I don't know where everybody's coming from throughout the country, have the power to decide your broadband future. And that means not only building community networks, which obviously is a big focus of mine, it's also about deciding how many 5G towers are too much or they should be zoned. And it's great that, New Yorkers definitely have gotten around the attempts of the federal government to try to dictate that to them where those towers should be. And that's true of some other cities and other states in the nation, but a lot of cities are unfortunately tied by, the federal mandate that, these towers have to be able to go wherever the telecom providers want them to go. People do think they are powerless in the face of cable and big telecom. And again, that may be true at the federal level, but at the local level, you and your elected representatives have a lot of power. So I urge you, if you're not exercising it now, to do so. And if you are, to continue to do so. And if there's any way that I or AEPB can be helpful, I'm at your door. I'm happy to do so. So thanks a lot, everybody.
Well, wow, that was fantastic, Gigi. It really gives us hope that there is an ability for local government and local consumers to have a choice. Now, you said something very interesting. You said that local communities do have the power to determine what their future should be. Now, I'm assuming you're referring to the Telecommunications Act, which states which reserves the right to local governments in order to determine what is best for them. And so I'd like to know if you could just extrapolate on that a little bit in terms of how people can use the Telecommunications Act in order to take their power, reclaim their power, so to speak.
Actually, so the Communications Act expressly anticipates that the states and the federal government will work together to have oversight over broadband, right? And that is, unfortunately, even when I was at the FCC, there was an awful lot of preempting of states and local communities. And, had I gotten on the FCC, I would have been the best friend of the states and local communities in that regard, because I think it's just almost like a knee-jerk reaction by the FCC, and it's the wrong one. And as far as I'm concerned, it's actually contrary to law. In the infrastructure bill specifically, when it comes to spending that $42.5 billion and also the money for digital equity, right? So I didn't mention that. It's $42.5 billion in the infrastructure bill for deployment. There's another almost $3 billion for digital equity. That is making sure that people actually, can use the technology, that they have the digital literacy to do so, that they, have access to affordable programs. The law says point blank, the state must confer with the local communities, right? It's got to be a partnership. So I wish the Communications Act was a little bit more specific about, community empowerment. But in my opinion, the communities know best what the needs of their residents are, and they really should take the lead. So obviously, when I was at the FCC, we actually did move to preempt laws of Tennessee and North Carolina that prohibited Chattanooga, for example, from expanding beyond its footprint. We were struck down by the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. So, there are times where I think the preemption is appropriate, but I think for the most part, the state has to be a partner with the federal government and not an adversary. And I think the fact that Congress has given so much money, and not just in the infrastructure bill, right? In the ARPA bill, the America Rescue Plan. I keep forgetting what it means. American Rescue Plan, the last COVID-19 relief bill, the money for middle mile, the money for last mile, the money for digital equity, all went to the states. So I think that was a recognition, at least by Congress, that number one, the FCC hasn't done a fantastic job of getting the digital divide closed. And number two, that the states and localities are really much closer to where the action is, and they know better than the federal government what the needs are.
Right, exactly. And there was an FCC rule that basically would preempt local government by allowing the industry to come in solely based on an anticipated, or what they felt was an anticipated capacity need, as opposed to showing an explicit gap in service, showing evidence of a gap in service and using the least intrusive means to fill that gap. That is the rule in the Second Circuit. I think that's the rule in a lot of the circuits in the United States. And actually, there was a very successful case in 2022, just last year, where a senior federal district court judge ruled that when one of the telecom companies wanted to come in and place a whole bunch of 4G antennas or towers in this village, it's called the village of Flower Hill, and the judge supported the town's denial of the application because the carrier was not did not produce the evidence to show that there was a gap in service, and therefore didn't meet the threshold. And the judge also opined that whatever the FCC rule was that would have allowed that preemption to come in for just by identifying a capacity need without any evidence of a gap in service, he said was not applicable in New York jurisdiction. So despite the fact, so basically they're saying that it doesn't matter what the FCC rule, interpretive rule is, it's what the Second Circuit states, what the rule is with respect to and how the telecommunications law is to be applied. And therefore that was struck down, basically, essentially.
That is correct. The circuit courts, the federal circuit courts, do have the power to overrule the FCC when they're being, when they're either violating the law, right, the plain language of the law, or they are acting in a what they call arbitrary and capricious way. And so that's what happened there. And you're seeing it elsewhere. I think that, again, there's a recognition that local communities know better than the federal government, what the needs of their residents are and what their concerns are about, whether it be about safety or there be about aesthetics. It doesn't really matter. It's just that the community knows better.
Exactly. And the other issue regarding digital equity that you were talking about, the $3 billion, what's interesting is that what's being touted in New York City as well as around the United States is that 5G is going to close the digital divide. And what concerns me about that argument is not just the technical aspects of wireless versus fiber. It's also that in the wireless, in terms of wireless, it becomes obsolete after a certain period of time. And there's this built-in obsolescence that's built in, and any technology company does this. I've negotiated a lot of contracts, and technology companies tend to make their systems legacy so that you can buy their new system, and so they can have a revenue source. And what concerns me is that with 3G having been sunsetted, and now people having to buy a 4G or 5G phone because the 3G phones don't work anymore, even though they work just fine, and they weren't interested in a smartphone. They work
just fine, that is correct.
Yeah, they work just fine, but now they've been sunsetted, and it's also been announced by the FCC that it's been sunsetted. It's kind of a built-in obsolescence that forces people to then have to buy new devices. If you're supposed to bridge the digital divide in low-income communities, and you're forcing them to have to buy new devices every few years or whenever we're dealing with the next generation, how is that bridging the digital divide? Isn't that perpetuating it or even guaranteeing the digital divide?
It is, and people may or may not know, there's already talk about 6G. And there was a huge fight over sunsetting 3G because, for reasons stated, a lot of people were still very, very happy with their 3G phone. It also impacted alarm systems, right? One longtime partner of mine in the fight for net neutrality was ADT, and they very much, opposed this because they were afraid that their alarm systems were going to stop working before they got a chance to retrofit them. So no, you're absolutely right. This is what's great about fiber, right? Is you're not going to have to go out and buy a new computer, every time they scale up to a new speed. So I mean, yeah, it's absolutely what you say, and it's about selling the next best thing. And it is unfortunate. It is a planned obsolescence. And I have a 5G phone. I can't really say that I noted a market improvement over 4G, and I think a lot of people will tell you that. But when it comes to doing something like this, you think I'm going to do it on this? I mean, and that's the other thing that people look, and I get it. For some folks, that's all they can afford is the phone, and they have to have the mobility. I get that, but that's what these programs are about. So the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is a $30 subsidy for broadband, I know some people are using it for phones, but I hope people will actually use it to get the connection to the house that allows their kid to do their homework, or allows them, to have multiple people gaming or watching Netflix at the same time, or, whatever. Some people have talked about, well, let's not allow the ACP to be used for mobile. I don't come down on that way, because I do think in certain communities, it's really important to have that mobile phone. But I don't think that should be the ultimate goal. It should be, I think, the ultimate goal that people have both a mobile device and also a hardwired device.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Gigi.
My pleasure.
Going to our next presenter, Kimberly McKinley is the Deputy Director and Chief Marketing Officer of Utopia Fiber. Utopia stands for Utah Telecommunication Open Infrastructure Agency. Utopia Fiber is a group of 11 Utah cities that joined together in 2004 to build, deploy, and operate a fiber to the home network to every business and household within their communities. In 2010, Kim joined the network as a member of its turnaround team and has helped cement today's Utopia Fiber as the fastest growing, highest rated, and most successful open access network in the United States. Day to day, Kim actively leads Utopia's marketing, sales, order fulfillment, and customer service teams. Kim is one of the industry's most recognizable leaders. She is a board member of the Fiber Broadband Association in Washington, D.C., and of the American Association for Public Broadband. She speaks frequently about open access networks on the national stage. Please welcome Kimberly McKinley.
Thank you, Odette, for having me here today. I know I had some slides. I don't know if we're going to get them up or not, but I am very honored to be here, and I do not ever want to go after Gigi and her amazing presentation ever again. So, but I am excited to be here. Like Odette said, and I apologize if you guys can hear my cat, who apparently really wants to be in this room right now too, in the background. But Utopia Fiber, like we said, is a group of cities that started this effort in 2004. To think that we started 11 cities came together in 2004 to build a fiber to the home network is mind-boggling to me. But the reason they did it is similar to what Gigi said earlier. They did it, and we can go to the next slide, just the Utah slide, but thank you. The reason they started it was because they did exactly what every community is doing today. They went to the incumbents and they said, will you build in our area? We believe it's important for economic development to have this kind of connectivity. And in no uncertain terms, the incumbent said to them, well, that's great, but no thanks. The ROI doesn't make sense for our business models. So in a very, very pioneering spirit that is Utah, the city said, well, I guess if you're not going to do it, we're going to have to do it. And they went out for the best technology and what was going to be future proof. And they found fiber. And they said, well, let's figure out how do we do this. So they came together, and to say in no uncertain terms, they were very like cutting edge of doing this. And in the first few years, from 2004 to 2008, they made a lot of mistakes. And by 2008, 2009 time period, what happened was they had spent about $185 million with probably approximately $40 million of asset in the ground. It was known for many years as the biggest failure and why municipalities shouldn't do this. So I say that because I think it brings in reference of why we are here today. And in 2009, I say it's in a great governmental attitude. They said, well, we're too big to fail. And they said, let's try this again. And they rebonded for additional. Since 2009, Utopia Fiber, our sister agency, UIA, has done approximately $500 million worth of financing that are being paid back solely by subscriber revenue alone. And what Utopia Fiber looks like today is that we are in over 20 Utah cities with fiber to the home service. We have business class services in over 50 Utah cities. We have different models that are out there. We are also the operational partner for Idaho Falls Fiber, and we're the operational partner for Yellowstone Fiber. And we are working with Golden State Connect Authority, which represents 40 counties, rural counties in the state of California. So we are very large and we are very growing. And one of our missions is to lift other communities who look to do this around the country, because we know what to do and what not to do through some, I always say, some blood, sweat, and some tears, and a lot of gray hair that I have to cover up now with a lot of hair dye that we've been through. But some of the things that Gigi said were very true. Some of the reasons that Utopia was considered a failure was not because the idea wasn't good. It was because of the lobbying efforts and the legislative efforts here in Utah. It was right before Utopia started, there was legislation passed that Utah cities cannot offer retail services directly. So there has to be a partner. So thus the open access model. It doesn't mean that we don't believe that today. What that really means is that we had to pivot and be very creative in our approaches in order to make this network happen. So to keep going on, I will say, and I think Gigi mentioned this as well, I think some of the communities of why they thought this was possible, even back in the day when nobody else was really, really doing it to the scale of Utopia, was because a lot of our were and are municipally power-owned cities. And they said, look at what our citizens are reaping the benefits of having their own municipally owned power. So I keep going down. The next thing is, what is open access? Open access, go one more up, back up. For those, no, up, back a couple more. The airport one, there you go. What is open access? And why are we in this? Well, if cities do anything well, I think a lot of cities do a lot of things well, but one of the core competencies of cities is to provide infrastructure, to build the essential infrastructure. And this is exactly what we do here at Utopia Fiber. These cities own there's different models out there, like Gigi said. Bountiful is owned by them, but for the 11 cities that are out there, and plus some of the new ones, we own the infrastructure and we let service providers run on those lines. We lease out those lines to local independent service providers, similar to what an airport does. Salt Lake City builds the airport and lets Delta, United, Southwest, whatever your airline of choice. It's exactly what we do. It's no different. And so we believe this is critical infrastructure. And by doing it this way, we have some of local ISPs who would not be in business today competing against large incumbents because of this infrastructure that is in place. And what that does is keeps money local, and nobody knows your community better than the people who live in it. And they know what is good for the community and why they're in there. And I missed saying this earlier, but I will say this, is that in the cities that we are in and the new cities that we are growing in, most of them, if not all of them, have two major incumbents in them. So when we talk about this, is not all about the unserved and underserved. It's about what that community believes is served and unserved. And like Gigi said, on the national level, they're telling us what we need, but why aren't we letting those cities and communities choose what they need? And we do have 16 providers on our network who offer service residentially and 30 business class. Some businesses don't really want to dive into, or business providers don't want to dive into how labor intensive residential offering residential services is. But we don't dislike the incumbents. They're welcome on our network anytime. We have an open invitation if they want to join. They have yet to do so for many reasons. They wouldn't, from our speculation, they don't want to really justify or say that this model really works because they have a lot of financial at risk. So to the next slide. And I always say this because I think it's very complicated of how Utopia works. Utopia works of, we are the main brand, and what is under, it's like, what flavor of ice cream do you want? We're the ice cream shop. What flavor of ice cream? So you have Utopia Fiber, and then you have whatever 16 providers you want. So the person will pay a bill to Utopia for their infrastructure, and then they get their services from someone else. And the services that we offer on the Utopia Fiber network for residential customers are 250 meg, 1 gig, and 10 gig. And those are all symmetrical, like Odette says. Fiber enables symmetrical connections. We believe, and I think this is something, we can go to the next slide now, is that we're going to talk about speed. And we talk about speed as something that's very important. And we talk about 25.3, we talk about 120, we talk about all those things. But I think that it's time to stop letting an industry decide what is best for the consumer and let the consumer decide what's best for them. And if you can see, this is a survey that we did last month. And don't tell anybody, this hasn't, not even inside Utopia knows about what we're seeing on this survey. I was just out of town, so nobody, the hot take of nobody has seen this around. But if you look at the survey, what you are seeing is if you give consumers choice, we are seeing almost 50% of our new customers and existing customers choose 1 gig if they have a choice. And I think that is something, a conversation we are not hearing around the country, is that people want more and they will sign up for more if you offer it to them. We are even seeing a huge uptick in 10 gig service because you're seeing 10 gig consumer devices that are out there. And the beauty about the Utopia network and other networks around there who are doing this, we could offer 100 gig today to residents if we wanted to. We would just have to change the equipment and in-home devices to make it work. When the cities built this, they built it for their residents, for their shareholders. And I think that makes an incredible bit of difference of what that looks like. So it is really interesting. I love seeing that we're seeing such an uptick in 1 gig service. And it is going to continue to go. And on our business class services, we have a few 100 gig service gig circuits out there. Okay. And then next slide, we talk about reviews and government getting into this space and that we shouldn't be into this space. I hear it more and more than ever. And I will let our customers speak for themselves. In an industry that has been notoriously bad for the consumer, we have a 4.6 rating on Google reviews with over 2,000 reviews of people coming in and commenting. And I think that speaks to a lot. We have to really change this conversation of what consumers private versus public. We are a publicly owned agency, and we are the highest reviewed service provider, but basically just the over network operator in the state of Utah, with a net promoter score of over 60. So it is saying that the consumers like us, they love us, and they want more They want more of us. I'm not trying to sing or anything over here, but it's so funny. I hear this all the time when I go out and people are like, when are you coming to my city? I used to have it over here, but you're not in my city now, is because it's once you get this kind of connectivity and service level, then it changes the conversation. A couple little things of the reasons why I think we succeed at Utopia Fiber is that we're upfront, honest, and transparent, from pricing to outages to build out schedules. I have put on our website that we won't get to you for 5 years to some residents. And I thought I was going to get blowback of people telling me a lot of things of what we should or shouldn't be doing. And people were just appreciative that we were honest and not saying it's going to be 2 months from now, that we're saying this is a realistic timeline. And I always say this, be disruptive. And in an industry where we have traditionally been treated that we need the ISPs more than they need us, change that equation. Every person who signs up for Utopia, they get a welcome box. And in that, there's a blanket and red vines. It's usually Twizzlers on the East Coast. I'm originally from the East Coast. And 2 referral cards that said, we appreciate you. We know you have choice. And we are grateful that you chose us. It's about the customer experience. And so now on to the next slide. I've talked about why cities are in this, the consumer experience, but the cities are in this too, because it's enabling essential infrastructure. Here is a slide that you can see that it's all our air detector systems in a small portion of some of our cities. If you haven't been here to Utah, first of all, I would recommend that you come out here. Probably not in the winter unless you're a skier. And in the summer it's hot, but it's very nice. But if you don't know this, Utah has some of the worst air quality in the nation in the winter when we have this thing called inversion. And we have 1 EPA sensor in all of the Utah, like Salt Lake City region. Well, that 1 EPA sensor might not be near your home. So air quality can change within 10 miles or a few miles. So every hut or location, we put a smart city air sensors that you can go and see what the air quality is in your area or your city or your neighborhood. And these are just some of these smart city functions that we have out there. We have a demo out there that's still in beta version of cameras facing the mountains for wildfire detection. Early wildfire detection, as we know, for some of the tragedies we've seen lately, is incredibly important. On some of those cameras, it can detect hotspots within just a pixel on a camera that can save millions in lives. This is what this essential infrastructure was input in here for, and why the cities have really done it. And my last slide, Gigi mentioned this too, is that I can sit here and say what we've done here in Utah and how it's worked for us. But for everybody who's out there, it's not about following what we do. Do what's best for your community. It's not necessarily open access. It might not be, municipally owned directly or that you offer service, but just do something. And I can't wait to be on watching this webinar and watching what the communities around this country and in New York have done. So thank you for the chance to speak about just a little bit of the Utopia story.
Okay, well, that's fantastic. Wow. So you have a 4.5 rating out of 5. That's amazing with 2,000 reviews.
4.6. 4.6.
Excuse me. That's very important. Wow, that's really great. And you have a fabulous video documentary about the success at Utopia Fiber. And one of the things that you said in that video is just fantastic. And you said, this is an industry that has let the industry dictate what the customer needs. And we have to switch that conversation. And that's the whole theme of this program. We've got to switch that conversation. And that's just perfectly done. Now, I'm interested with respect to those sensors. Are there any sensors with respect to wireless emissions? If things go beyond what the FCC regulates, in addition to just the air quality, because I'm assuming that when you're looking at air quality, you're also looking at radiation and how much that's affecting people and whether it's within.
We have a whole smart city team at Team Utopia who are developing a lot of these applications. Right now, we don't have those on those sensors. The the company that we've chosen. But we're looking at all kinds of sensors that will be deployed across our network. And any innovators who are looking for a lab or a test lab, we're always interested in talking to people to let the innovation happen. Because what's great about city networks is they can let innovators come and use their network for these things. If they are owned by a private entity, sometimes they will not let them have access to that. So I think that is the benefit of what we have at the Utopia network. But we're working on light pollution, how you can turn or dim lights when you don't have the traffic, or we're working on, everybody, especially in New York City, is smart parking, of how we can really nail that down, because we all know that we waste a lot of time looking for parking spaces. And we're out here trying to innovate and try to figure out what we can do to really utilize this fiber and use it for the betterment of these cities. I think it's about the life, looking at the quality of life, and not just about like streaming YouTube faster.
Okay, well that's a very important point. And also, we have a couple of questions in the chat relating to the installation of fiber. That if fiber is already installed for connecting, I'm not sure how you're set up in Utah, but if it's already set up for connecting 5G cell towers, can it be converted to fiber to the premises?
It really depends. For us, the way our network is architectured, we're an active E network, so we home run every single connection. So we have a fiber per home. We can reutilize and look at how much connectivity is at some of those towers. But something that we do in Utopia is that we actually connect a lot of the cell phone, some of the cell phone towers out there to this. So we believe that fiber is the solution for in-home and businesses, but we also believe that the 5G and stuff are ancillary solutions for, on the go and doing what you need to do. It's not I think a one size fits all solution on that, but there are creative approaches of looking at some of the stuff that's already deployed and see if we can reutilize that and architect it in the way that we need. But it's all dependent on what those really specs look like.
Okay, and so if you have, another question is, if you have fiber to the premises, can that be integrated for mobile connectivity?
We have not yet. I'm not saying we won't, but we have not utilized it for mobile connectivity yet. Okay. Besides connecting some of the cell phone towers, yes.
Okay, that's perfectly, I totally understand. That's perfectly fine. So thank you so much, Kim. And we're going to go on to our next panelist. Timothy Schoechle is a Ph.D. and is an international consultant in computer and communications engineering and in technical standards development. He is a senior research fellow of the National Institute for Science, Law, and Public Policy in Washington, D.C., where he authored a seminal report, Reinventing Wires, the Future of Landlines and Networks. He focuses on engineering and policy related to fiber optic networks, distributed solar plus storage, and microgrids. Dr. Schoechle develops related technical standards for ISO and IEC, which stand for the International Organization for Standardization and the International Electrotechnical Commission. He is also an entrepreneur who has engineered the development of electric utility premises gateways and energy management systems for over 25 years. He was a co-founder of BI Incorporated, a pioneer developer of RFID, radio frequency identification technology, presently a $1 billion company in Boulder, Colorado. He is an active participant of the GridWise Architecture Council, hosted by the Pacific Northwest National Laboratories and the U.S. Department of Energy. Dr. Schoechle holds a Ph.D. in communications policy from the University of Colorado at Boulder and served as a faculty member of the University of Colorado College of Engineering. Welcome, Timothy Schoechle.
Well, thank you, Odette. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be on this panel. This has been terrific. I wanted to emphasize this. This is the book you just referred to, Reinventing Wires. It was published in 2018, but it's still very, very current, relevant. I'll talk a little bit about some of the issues. It's about a 150-page book, and it's freely available on the internet. It basically traces the history of the technology and the regulatory policy and the evolution of all communication systems, including wired and wireless. And it shows the title is particularly relevant to fiber, because that was the main theme that I developed in the book, was the that fiber was, and I'll discuss some of the recommendations that were in the book here. I got to move this. Okay. The first priority is fiber, was that I identified after tracing the history of telecom, and particularly the emergence of the wireless industry and why it happened the way it did, why things played out, and what happened to wireline communications. My number one priority was fiber to the home for all, and as probably the best answer to 5G and wireless. A fundamental principle is fiber should be owned and controlled by the community, not by private partners. And I think that a good example of one way to do that is Utopia, the presentation you just heard. That's I think in that case, the cities and towns needed someone who was knowledgeable and could do this, but they didn't give their control of their network because inevitably, if the city gives up control of the network to some private party, or control and ownership, it will be bought out by. That's the history of telecom in the form of the cable industry. They will be bought into a monopoly right now. And what I identified in the book was what I call the triopoly of Verizon, Comcast, and AT&T. Everybody should know that AT&T of today is not the original AT&T. It's a reincarnation of it. Mainly it was Southwestern Bell that bought up the regional Bell companies, or the ones in its territory. What I would also like to call your attention to is a forthcoming paper that's relevant to this that I'm working on now. I've been working on it for a couple of years. It's a briefing paper. It's called The Sustainability of Telecommunications. I use the word telecom to mean both the communication media and the applications that run on it as one big ball of wax. The theme of this will ultimately be that, as it's structured today, the telecom industry is not sustainable on the present path. In fact, it's far from sustainable. The reasons are basically, one is an excessive focus on wireless devices and applications. And I'd like to emphasize the point that Odette made, and also Kim earlier, that these media, the fiber is not interchangeable. Fiber broadband is not interchangeable with wireless. Wireless devices are not a substitute for fiber. They're a different medium altogether, and a more limited one in some ways. They're different media, and that's an important point to remember. And part of it is the data, the format of the way the information is used and displayed is far different. is not, and I like the slogan of the Fiber Broadband Association, if it's not fiber, it's not broadband. I think Kim made a very good point in that the mobile is ancillary. Mobile wireless service is ancillary. It's not basic. Fiber is basic. We need the mobile services as well, but they are ancillary services. Unfortunately, they have become dominant in a lot of people's minds. The other point I'd like to make is the industry has a vast waste of energy, and that energy consumption is growing fast. Wireless technology basically uses at least 10 times more energy to transmit a signal than a wired network, wired media. The data center proliferation is one of the biggest energy hogs there is. And we have an industry that is focused on following the stock market frenzy around such things as cloud services, cryptocurrency, and AI, and anything else new, any new thing that comes down the road that the investors can hop onto. That's what the emphasis in the industry ends up like, things like self-driving cars. It is socially destructive. The applications, particularly social media, socially destructive and toxic to children and adults, and toxic in a number of ways. I'm referring here mainly to mentally toxic. And I'll be going into this detail. I'm in this in the new paper we're putting out. It was asked. I think someone was asking, why is all this tsunami of federal regulation or federal law being brought out to try to preempt local regulation and zoning of cell sites. I've been a little bit involved in that topic in Colorado. The reason is that, in a way, 5G has been a failure. It's failed. It was caught in a number of downdrafts in the last few years, and its performance has been mediocre compared to all the promises that were made. And that's why we're starting to hear a lot, especially in the IEEE, about 6G will remedy these problems, which I think is another mirage. The basic model of the reason that things are so bad with social media is basically the topic is called, appropriately named, surveillance capitalism. It's the driving force for telecom and media. This comes from the title of a book written in 2019, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, the Fight for a Human Future at the New Frontier of Power, by Professor Shoshana Zuboff at Harvard University Business School. This is a masterpiece of research and documentation of where the industry is. In fact, even today, focusing on the history of Google, Facebook, and a lot of other these social media directions. There's a new one every day. Social media is addictive by design, and as it's extractive, invasive, manipulative, destructive, and as a business model. And I think that we have to keep in mind that the portability of wireless devices like smartphones it does have an addicting quality. It's designed to be that way, to gather data on the users and to funnel it into this this data empire. And this is not necessarily true of devices you'd have in the home. I think it was pointed out, I think Gigi pointed out earlier, that having a device in your home is a much different application and a much different way of using the medium than something that's tethered to you, walk around with, and are dependent on every minute of the day, like a cell phone. It's just an entirely different experience, and it's designed that way. The cellular networks, the 5G networks, and all of the cellular networks are really separate networks. They're not the same. And people were asking about, well, can your optical fiber network support both the cell network and in-home stuff? Well, basically, when you get some fiber to the home, you're going straight into the internet. If you're going through a wireless, you're going through another whole level of control and monitoring and formatting of data. So it's a separate network on top of the fiber network. The recommendations I made briefly, and please keep me on time here. Basically, the recommendations in the Reinventing Wires, and also will be again in the forthcoming paper, complete the build out of fiber to the home for all communities and with community control. Liberate the internet from the centralized corporate domination, limit corporate ownership. It should be a common carrier, public utility. Reestablish the original concept of antitrust enforcement and action against these corporations, break up the tech giants where it's appropriate, telecommunication and social media in particular, restore broadcast media fairness doctrines, and regulate advertising and monopoly of advertising. To sum up here, I think, I have just to give you a preview, I have another project that's been in the works for a couple of years that will be a entirely new report called Reinventing Electricity, the Future of Climate and Energy. I've already given presentations on sections of this, but I'm pulling it together into a new book of the same dimension as Reinventing Wires. Basically, it presents a different vision of electricity than what is now being promoted by our Department of Energy and government subsidized captains of industry and disaster capitalism. An electricity grid system that is being expanded based on ancient, problematic, and obsolete assumptions. And I will be showing how optical fiber networks in communities can bring a new resilient system of local energy and microgrids.
Thank you, Timothy. That's wonderful. And so when you just ended it on a perfect note with respect to resiliency, how is it that fiber optics is more resilient and more sustainable than wireless for in the home use?
I think one reason is the wireless. The wireless is, as was pointed out so appropriately, it's built-in obsolescence. That's the idea behind wireless. It's fundamentally based on its own obsolescence and driving it into you to buy new equipment all the time. That's not true. If you bring optical fiber, it's future-proof. All kinds of equipment will work, and they'll work for a long time. And the fiber doesn't. It will last. It'll outlast all of us. It's more resilient because most of the networks being installed now are called passive optical network, PONs. Those are the standards it's based on, and those are those can operate on a local basis as well as a regional basis. They don't use electric power except in a way that's they're not dependent on power. Although if you do have the service in your home, you have to have a little backup battery for your network interface, because that's gone away with the demise of copper. But that's easily done, and the new standards I think will be fixing that problem.
All right. And I just want to tell the audience that IEEE stands for Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, and it is the world's largest technical professional organization. Is that right, Tim? Did I get that right?
Yeah, and I'm a life member of the IEEE, but I have to say, it's really a mixed bag. I mean, these are the champions of 5G, the champions of 6G, because their main motivation is looking for jobs for their engineers. And I'm one of them, but I think there's a better thing to do with their time than what a lot of them are doing. But so they have come out with some very good reports, particularly one on electric vehicles that I recommend everybody look at. It's called it was published in IEEE Spectrum. It's a real masterpiece article, a long paper on EV evolution explained. And it's not just about EVs, it's about the whole electrical system.
Very good. And also we've been asked from the chat, do you have a website that people can go to?
Well, what the best one I have so far, I haven't taken the time, I should, to put all my stuff in one place, but the best place to look right now is a website called gettingsmarteraboutthesmartgrid.org.
Gettingsmarteraboutthesmartgrid.org.
That's right.
Okay, great. Ben, if you can put that in the chat, that would be great. Very good. And also, with respect to, you were talking about fiber and wireless being totally different media, and that wireless is not a substitute for fiber or for broadband.
Well, one way it's different is I go into it in Reinventing Wires to describe the difference between getting your information off of a tiny little screen with a compressed image and getting it off of a larger computer screen. It's just a different medium. You have to cram everything into this little box, and it's mainly tailored, like they call these cell phones. Well, they're not phones at all. The voice quality is really downgraded from even the older cell phones, and certainly vastly downgraded from the quality of voice on the wireline system. But they don't care about. It's not about voice communication. These devices are about catching your brain, getting control of your brain, and pumping information into it and sucking information out of it. That's what the devices are for, and they're to get you addicted to having access to it 24/7 almost. You know, a lot of people are just they cannot go inches away from their mobile device. It's just part of them. And this is an illness.
Yes, and I remember reading an article about the technology titans in Silicon Valley who have their nannies sign agreements to promise not to use their cell phones or computers or anything in front of their children, because they actually limit or even sometimes even prohibit their children from using any of the electronic devices and gadgets and tablets and smartphones that they market to the public. So it's very ironic. So they must know something that the rest of us don't know, or and I think it may have a lot to do with addiction.
They know well what they're doing.
Right. Very good. And so right now, I see some raised hands. We're not taking live questions from the audience. If you can put your questions in the chat, and then we'll take the questions from there. Thank you. Now, I'd like to introduce Mr. Banks. And I know he's in the audience. Ben, you can spotlight Mr. Banks. And I will introduce him. Mr. Banks is going to be joining us now for the Q&A. And we've got lots of questions from the chat. And as soon as Mr. Banks comes on, that would be great. Ben?
Well, I am here, and thanks for introducing me. This has been one of the best, I think, events that we've had. It's just wonderful. I'm so excited to be on the same call with Gigi Sohn. By the way, I followed her for many, many years. We've talked many, many different times. And all the voices that we've heard today are just absolutely incredible. The first question I'd love to ask for anyone of the speakers, including Ms. Wilkens, is what's the real difference between municipal broadband and community broadband? I heard both of those two words. So I'm curious from each one, sort of how do you define those two different things, the community broadband driven or municipal broadband? Perhaps Gigi could take that one.
Yeah. So again, and I'm happy to have my fellow panelists disagree with me on this. I don't think there is much of a difference. I just like the term community better. Like municipal kind of connotes government, and which I have no problem with. I want to be, I've been in the government. It's sort of more kind of formal. Community means all of us, right? So technically, there really isn't much difference. Though municipal oftentimes does mean like the Chattanooga, we own the utility. And so I think people view municipal as kind of the Chattanooga, Wilson, North Carolina, or Lafayette, Louisiana, where you already have a public utility, a municipal utility. But I don't know. Again, Kim, disagree with me. I think for all purposes, there isn't that much.
I think you're right, Gigi. I think the only thing that I'm seeing that I would like maybe differ on is, so our Yellowstone Fiber partnership is a 501c3. And I think that why we consider that that's a community-owned broadband network that is not owned by the city. Municipally owned, I usually think that there is a municipal owner of some part of it. That's the only difference I would say between the two, but I think they're very much interchangeable. I think it's just connecting every community. When I speak of community, it's that we pass every home in the community, and that's the difference. But basically, no, I think it's the same.
I don't think municipal broadband would include co-ops. Like we consider at APB, we consider co-ops public broadband because they are owned by community members. So as opposed to the local government. So it can be exclusionary in a way that I don't think for our purposes. Like our goal again is to have community ownership of the assets, and co-ops meet that requirement.
Right. And I just want to say that Mr. Banks, I wanted to introduce you a little bit and introduce Silicon Harlem. So I just want to say that was a great, excellent question. So Mr. Banks is Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Silicon Harlem. Silicon Harlem's mission is to combine technology and innovation with affordable connectivity that can enable a sustainable economic engine in emerging communities across the United States. Under Mr. Banks' leadership, Silicon Harlem has attracted over $50 million into Upper Manhattan for advanced infrastructure research and test bedding, positioning Upper Manhattan as a tech and innovation hub that is one of the fastest growing areas for tech startups, entrepreneurs, and companies. He has established critical programs based on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM, in public schools, and several nonprofits in Upper Manhattan, which have become gateway opportunities for many students to pursue further education. So I just wanted to let everybody know who Mr. Banks is, and he is our own in Manhattan. He belongs to us. He's in New York City, and we're so happy to have him in our Q&A. You're muted, Mr. Banks.
That's a very rare thing, but I will absolutely say that Counselor, everybody knows that Counselor Odette Wilkens is one of the greatest lawyers I've ever been able to connect with. And you're just one of those hardworking people that I love, and I appreciate you allowing me to say a few words here. I did have another question. I do want to talk a little bit about 5G, but before I do that, I wanted to ask all of you, certainly Kimberly, what you've done. Where is the TV into that? Like, do all of the providers that are running on your system that provides content, television, cable TV, all that kind of stuff, or is it just broadband?
It depends on the provider. We have seen a lot of providers who've gotten rid of their TV solutions. We still have a few that have them. But the last that I have really looked at the reporting, it's about 93 to 95% do data only. You are still seeing some legacy phone that people want to keep their old phone numbers, but a lot of people are going with streaming. And I hear a lot of people around the country who say TV is a very important aspect of their customer experience. And I'm not sure if it's because I live in Utah and it's a very young and educated demographic that we see a difference of, because of it's such a young demographic that we see it differently here. I'm not sure. I've been wondering why we don't see a larger demand for a traditional TV service, but we really, really don't see it. Most people will use YouTube TV or some of the other streaming platforms.
Yeah, the problem is that traditional TV is so expensive. I mean, you may have heard about the fight that Charter, which is Spectrum, which I believe is out on Long Island. You can hear that I'm from Long Island because I say Long Island.
Queens.
Having a fight with Disney, right, over what they call retransmission consent fees, right? And what the big content producers do is they bundle 15 channels that, 10 of which or 14 of which the cable operator doesn't want, and says, well, if you want ESPN, you've got to, in Disney Channel, you've got to get all these other channels, and they charge a premium for it. So, you have occasionally these fights between the cable providers and the content providers. And I think a lot of the, broadband only companies are just like, and particularly community broadband, they're like, why do I want to tack that cost on to my, to my customers, to my subscribers? I mean, I pay for 300 symmetrical, which isn't that awesome, Verizon Fios. I do get cable because I'm old and my wife is old. We pay like $240 a month. I mean, that's insane. And a lot of that is the cost of the programming.
Well, this is why I talk about this, is because what I'm finding. Okay, so Gigi, by the way, for the past year, I worked with the FCC on this very major issue of those who have it, those who don't. And it got littered with a lot of the incumbents on this particular commission. And so when we talked about why some people don't have and why people do, I kept saying, well, number one, it's affordability. But some of the rest of the team were saying, well, it's because people are just not, educated or don't know enough about the internet. All these different reasons why 30% of people don't have internet in most of the country. And I'm curious from your perspective, or anyone's perspective, but certainly Gigi, Sohn, we know, since you and I both are old and we both know what this has been going on for a long time, they have been losing the incumbents, particularly. I know you said at the very beginning you didn't want to smash the incumbents. I don't either, but I'm going to have to a little bit, which is, hey, they know and I know that most of their money comes from TV. Broadband is not a big money maker. I'm sorry. It's just the kind of work between sponsors and commercials and actors and actresses that comes through that portal is great. But while, as Kimberly said, young people are sort of, hey, forget all that. We don't need to do that. Just give me the internet and I can find whatever kind of content I want. I'm finding that these big guys are trying to figure out how to either get their investors back for that or not sure what they're going to do. If you look at all the news in the last few weeks, it's been a problem. So curious what any of you, certainly Gigi, if you don't mind starting out, what your perspective about TV versus broadband.
So I guess, Clayton, I would disagree with you. I keep calling him Mr. Banks like he's like my teacher.
That's okay with me.
Everybody calls him Mr. Banks.
I think actually the broadband companies are making a mint, because as Kim will tell you much better than I, like the cost of adding extra capacity is bupkis, as they would say in Yiddish. See, I'm showing myself to be a real New Yorker. Yet, so for my 300, if I would to buy my 300 megabit symmetrical connection, it would be, $90 a month, which is a lot. And if I wanted to upgrade to a gig symmetrical, it's something like $120 or $140. I mean, it doesn't really cost them much of anything, if at all, to kind of upgrade that service. I probably have to get a new modem, which I pay for anyway, right? With a monthly fee. So I think they're making money hand over fist over broadband. It's just particularly for the cable companies, the legacy cable companies. I think they can't really give that up, because then people will say, the hell with you. Right. And they'll go to fiber, right? They'll go to.
Well, I mean, if I could say, because I hear what you're saying, but here's the thing. So when you look at broadband from the whole history of it, it was a throw-in for the cable industry. Okay. It was not their number one thing. I was there, right? So they were not like, it was really started with telecos, right? So internet started with telecos, not the cable TV. I was helping some of those companies even creating their modems. They didn't know what was going on. So the cost for broadband is so much lower than there is for providing TV. That's a big issue for them. They can make a lot more money on TV, no question, but there's a lot of cost to keep it going. Broadband got really great for them because of COVID. I mean, the money that COVID went when it comes to the broadband, and TV was wing. And so I'm just concerned if that's part of the reason why we're having a affordability issue. I mean, the cost of going from, you talked about speed. So going from 500 megabytes to, let's say, 750 megabytes of speed, how much more does that create a issue for the incumbent or any provider? It's pretty much like pennies. So, it's an amazing thing. I mean, that we got to sort of bring on what you guys are talking about in terms of a community and municipal and things of that nature, where it can be literally just be broadband, and certainly the big guys should be a premium. It's almost like mail, right? You got U.S. mobile mail, and then you got FedEx. So there might be something we have to talk about those things.
Let me just say one thing, and I will say I want to say I'm conflicted, but in all transparency, so today I was just voted on to the board of Two Cows, which owns Ting, which is a last mile ISP that works with a lot of municipalities. They provide a $30 2 gig symmetrical offering to recipients of the Affordable Connectivity Program.
Where is this exactly?
This is in Alexandria, Virginia, right?
Wow, I'm moving to Virginia.
There you go. Exactly.
So that that will tell you, and they can afford to do that, right? I mean, they get the money back from the government, but they can afford to do that. So that really tells you about the economics of providing 2 gigs, not 1, 2.
Exactly.
At $30.
That's amazing. I think a lot more than that for maybe 300 or 400 megabits per second. This has been a great, lively discussion. I do want to get to some of the questions in the chat. And further to what we were talking about, there's one question about, can 5G be reduced back to 3G if the load is lessened by fiber to the premises?
No, it's no. I mean, again, I'm not the engineer, but that's if that was the case, then we wouldn't have a sunset of 3G. It's just not possible. Right. It's a spectrum. It's a spectrum that's being used. It's the towers. It's the whole infrastructure. But I'm not the best person to answer that question.
That's okay. And Kim, did you have something?
No, I don't have anything to say on that. I was just going to say on the what Gigi was talking about on the 2 gig, it's about scale. If you're operating a small city, you can't offer some of those prices because they don't have the scale of the substantial customer base that Ting does. And I think that's the benefit of as Utopia is, that you have the cities coming together to pass that many homes to be able to offer those kind of services. But I will say things to Mr. Banks. is that what we're seeing here in Utah, and it has been very much told to us, is that if these cities start trying to compete and offer low-cost services directly to those residents, that they will, some of those incumbents will sue because they think it's unfair treatment of the cities offering better service than they're getting from those resident incumbents. So it makes it very challenging, even though the cities own the network and are operating it. How do they provide that low cost affordability when they're kind of put in the corner of?
That's amazing. So you have economies of scale because you've joined together.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas
you have economies of scale. Yes.
Yeah. Whereas
that there would be no. Yeah. No, it's we have cities of 500 homes to the second largest city in Utah. Granted, it's Utah. It's not New York by any means of scale, but that they couldn't build these own networks without having a partner. So it is very much of like creative approaches and partnership.
Well, that's
Odette, if I could just add one thing. In Vermont, because the cities are so small, they formed what called our communications union districts, where a number of different towns join together and build the infrastructure. And that gives them the kind of scale that is necessary to operate successfully. I think they have the same thing in Washington State, right? Public utilities districts, where, because it's funny, I was vacationing in Ocracoke Island, which is the southernmost island in the North Carolina Outer Banks. And a guy recognized who I was, which was really weird. And he set me up talking to a county commissioner about this, because Ocracoke's connectivity, both mobile and wired, is just awful. And I said to him, Ocracoke Island only has 1,000 permanent residents. I said, you've got to join with the other Outer Bank, other cities in the Outer Banks, or, do a Hyde County, which is the name of the county there, and do it together, because you can't do it yourself with 1,000. Maybe you can, but it's not going to be sustainable, I don't think.
Right. Well, we have another question from the chat, and they say, I would like to know how fiber versus wireless affects net neutrality and the ability of telecom companies to prioritize the dissemination of different streams of information and the monetization of these. And I guess that would go to you, Gigi.
Well, unless, is Tim still there? I don't know if Tim wants to take that.
Tim?
I've been dominating the conversation. I don't want to do that, even though I easily could.
Okay, Tim? I think he may have stepped away.
Here we are.
Oh, here we go.
I'm here. I just couldn't find the button. What was the question again?
Yeah,
please?
sure. I'll repeat the question. It's a long question. I would like to know how fiber versus wireless affects net neutrality and the ability of telecom companies to prioritize the dissemination of different streams of information and the monetization of these.
Well, the wireless, as I pointed out, the wireless networks are built on top of the fiber, the basic internet fiber in the first place. So they all have fiber. The cell sites all run off of fiber, like what they do, but they have a separate network. They have to reformat all the data, and they don't just reformat it, they change the content in a lot of ways to fit the display device. And so in the process of doing that, they can also extract all the data from it. And so it's not, it's not at all a private network. It's all that data is accessible to the provider and the wireless operators. So that's why they jealously, one reason that 5G wasn't successful wasn't as successful as it could have been, was that they didn't share their frequencies. They were all operating as separate networks and using different frequency bands. Like T-Mobile was using a 600 megahertz lower frequency bands, or the 900, and people like Verizon were trying to go up into the gigabit. What do you call it? Gigahertz spectrum, and 6G proposes to go even higher. So they're all keeping it separate, so they can it's this capitalist business model. They just have to compete with each other and try to take over the customers, and so they're going to all handle it differently. So you know, when you use those media, you are subject to whatever those providers want to show you, and I guess I don't know if does that address the question.
Well,
can I take a swipe at it, Odette?
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think there should be a difference. Okay. However, certainly with fiber, there should never, ever, ever be a need for, you know, any kind of there should never be a need for any discrimination on any network. Okay. But as we all know, a lot of the wireless companies and mobile companies have what's called data caps, which to me, depending on how they're applied, could be a net neutrality violation. I think the FCC actually opened up an investigation on the need for data caps because there is no need anymore. It's just a way to create artificial scarcity. But in the past, you know, I think when I was at Public Knowledge, some of the companies were using the caps to discriminate against certain applications, you know, certain services, and that obviously is a net neutrality violation. Today, they just do it again to create artificial scarcity and get people to go to higher tiers. And that's anti-consumer in its own right. It may not be anti-net neutrality, again, depending on how they apply the caps. My feeling, you know, what T-Mobile was doing a number of years ago was saying, okay, we're going to zero rate. That's what they called it. Okay. Zero rate all video services. And my response to that was, and everything else comes under the data cap. And my response to that was, so you're going to not put under the data cap the most bandwidth intensive applications? Like, why do you need a data cap? And but it's still a practice that still goes on. Like I said, I think the FCC launched some sort of, you know, investigation. I don't know where it's at right now, but to me, there's no real purpose for data caps other than to extract more money from consumers that can't afford it.
Right. Yes, Tim?
Yeah, I'd like to also add that not only do the wireless operators have, you know, different have a different layer, another layer of management of what you're seeing, but they call it the five. They have what they call now the 5G. There's an initiative called the 5G Core. Try to merge the fiber access to the home with the 5G network, and this is kind of under the radar standards work that's being done in a standards committee that I'm aware of, that is a stealth way of colonizing the fiber broadband and actually creating forcing that wireless model onto the entire internet. I don't know how successful that will be, but that's going on and right now.
Thank you. We have another question, and this one's directed to Gigi. Is Gigi aware of the industry using a combination of fiber optics and satellites and calling it broadband via fiber optics? We certainly have the satellite issue, which adds another layer of complexity to the equation.
I'm not aware. I'd love to learn more. Please, if you've got information, gbsohn@aapb.us. That sounds crazy. In fact, nobody considers satellite, and for the purposes of the BEAD program, all the funding programs, satellite, even the low Earth orbit satellites, which for some rural areas that have nothing else are a savior, but they're still not considered broadband, and they shouldn't be. But that's very interesting. I'd love to learn more. I hadn't heard this before. Now, I just want to remind people that unfortunately, 25 megabits per second down, 3 up is still the standard for broadband under the FCC's definition. That's a standard we adopted when I was at the FCC.
Too bad we don't have a better FCC commissioner.
And this was the standard we set in 2014. And, the chairwoman has talked about raising it to 100 down, 20 up. And to be honest, that's yesterday's news too. That's not an adequate definition, but it's the definition that Congress set for unserved and underserved areas for the BEAD program in the law. And she very much likes to hew to what Congress is doing, but it's too little too late, I think, in the opinion of a lot of folks, as a definition. But maybe that's all she can get through in a 2-2 commission. There should be 3-2 soon, but we shall see what happens.
So what should be our standard then? I think the Treasury Department or some department in the government came up with 100 symmetrical.
100 symmetrical. I suppose that's better, but
will wireless be able to meet that standard?
Would cable?
Would wireless be able to? No. Okay. Because right now
why don't we just go to 1 gig symmetrical? Why do we keep going?
That's what Encompass. So Encompass is a trade association that I work very closely with. That's what they say. I'm down with that. I like that.
Okay, excellent. And we have another question about can fiber to the home work for rural areas, such as Native American reservations? There was an article in the Wall Street Journal today that talked about the high cost of putting in fiber in rural areas. But I don't think they were considering banding together with other cities or other localities for this.
I think it's absolutely doable. I think there's a lot of funding out there. I think there's a lot of resources. There's a lot of fiber in the ground that you can lease to get into some of those areas to make it happen. But it takes a very cooperative and creative approach. I think what people don't understand about this industry is that there's a lot of fiber leasing from what people would view as competitors. Some of the people who would view as Utopia competitors, we lease fiber from them, they lease fiber from us. There's a lot of those back end deals that happen. Do they want to go out publicly and never say it? No, but they happen every day. And that is how, let me give you an example. We connected Morgan, Utah, right before COVID hit. It was one of the cities that came to us, and the major incumbent actually pulled out of that city a few years ago. The only way we got into that rural area is because we did a trade with UDOT, the Utah Department of Transportation, that we used their conduit and the fiber they had in the ground to get up those canyons. But you have to look at every resource and what is out there to get to those areas, but I absolutely believe it's feasible.
Okay. And so I think you should get in touch with the Wall Street Journal and correct them on that article that I saw today.
Well, they may have, there's a trade association called NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association, and they'd be appalled to hear that fiber can't be built in rural areas because that's what they're doing. I own a piece of land in far northwest corner of North Carolina near the Tennessee line, and I get fiber to the home. So it really, it really depends. Yeah, is it expensive? Yes, but this is what the government subsidies are about, is about getting it out there. It's a hell of a lot cheaper than it was a number of years ago. So there are some places, I suppose, where fiber is infeasible for whatever reason, but for the most part, that's not the case.
Well, maybe you can write an op-ed or something in the Wall Street Journal and address this article. I can even send
You're right. I've had plenty of coverage in the Wall Street Journal. I'm done with that. I don't think they picked anything I had to say.
I understand. Tim.
Yeah, I think I'd like to call your attention to the fact that a lot of the rural fiber is being brought in by rural electric co-ops. And if you get electricity service, it's feasible to get fiber because they already have a wire. So they have some infrastructure. So but even like that, I saw that Wall Street Journal article. I just think the Wall Street Journal wants, one of their big advertisers is the wireless industry. So, we heard, I should also point out that the Fiber Broadband Association has published a number of papers, both on the satellite issue and on the fixed wireless as a substitute for fiber. And shown, these reports show that it's really not that those are not good solutions. Either satellite service or are not adequate. These are separate reports, but they've done a lot of work on that. So I think they've shot that one down.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We have another question, and I think this is a good one for Kim, and that is, what role does municipal government play in bridging the digital divide in urban areas?
I think that, and I say this all the time, I actually had a meeting with one of our senators, head of commerce here in the state of Utah. And Utopia, whether we like it or not, has become political fodder in Washington, D.C., because what we're known to be a democratic concept in a very red state. And they said, well, you believe it's a utility. And I said, no. I said, if you view it as a utility, that I think it is the city's role to pass every single home so the residents have access to it. I absolutely believe it's a utility, because that is one of the legs of the three-legged stool of giving people access. And I think, and I will kind of go back to the previous question, is that we keep talking about rural getting fiber there, but I think we have missed the conversation that a lot of urban centers do not have the connectivity that we need. And I think it's that the cities and the communities have the obligation to pass every house. And that is the first step of really reducing the digital divide and getting people robust connectivity in their communities. And it's one of the reasons when Utopia goes into cities, we build out to every resident. They don't have to sign up. It is a subscriber-based model, but they at least can if they choose to, and work with the providers or us on the ACP and other programs out there.
That's great. Thank you. Another question is, what can people do when the government is completely wedded to the incumbents and have to break up that cozy relationship?
That's a question that is the question for the ages. In my presentation, and I forgot to mention this, and I say it all the time, because we're hearing from more and more cities. I think COVID changed the conversation even to some of the lawmakers who are the coziest, because they couldn't deliver. And when people ask us to come to their city, I always ask, why are we here? Why did you call us? Why are we here? And they said, because I'll use a curse word. We're so flipping sick, or I won't use the curse word, flipping sick of hearing from our residents that they want more. So we asked you to walk in the door, because I think what people don't realize is that residents have a voice. No matter what the politicians are saying, if the city leaders hear enough of it, sometimes it makes it move. Does it always make it move? No. But you have to get, like Gigi said in her presentation, have somebody who's out there who's really just being a lightning rod and forcing the conversation in some of those cities and publicizing it and making it public of some of the tactics that are happening out there. And I think that is one of the things that AAPB is doing, is trying to shed light on some of the dirty tactics and how much money really goes into lobbying to fund some of these efforts.
It's
right.
very interesting. Telecom policy is very partisan in DC, but it's not at the local level. Like some of the best known original, early municipal builds were built in places like Tennessee and Louisiana by Republican, mayors. So broadband really isn't a partisan issue. And what mayor doesn't want to run for re-election on the platform that I provided you affordable broadband? And I will say, when the pandemic hit, I think people's attitudes towards broadband as necessary, not necessary, not a luxury, completely changed. And people will call it a utility. That used to be a big, bugaboo, and oh, it's not a utility, but I think everybody thinks of it that way. It may not be regulated like a utility, but it's essential like a utility. And as I said before, yes, the federal government definitely has its issues, but at the local level, it's a very, very, very different ball game. And even at the state level as well. Like, again, it's true that there are a bunch of state legislatures who are very, very close to the big incumbents. But if you get a bunch of cities, so Colorado is somewhat of an example. So Colorado used to have a restriction on community broadband saying that anytime a town wanted to, elect to have a community-owned broadband system, they had to have a ballot initiative. And I think about 120 or so communities had ballot initiatives. Comcast fought every single one, and they lost every single one. Finally, wow. Jared Polis, the governor, said, why do we have this law? It's just causing, communities money. So there's a lot you can do, particularly, again, when communities join together and go to the state legislature and say, you're killing us. You're killing this economy. Young people are not going to want to move here if we don't have robust broadband.
Yes, exactly. And that's exactly what we're doing here in New York City. We have 16 community boards that there's only supposed to be advisory, but they all came out on paper saying we disapprove, we call for moratoria on these things. And I don't think the administration was expecting that. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of power in that kind of pushback, and people don't think they have the power, but they actually do. So there are some other questions. This is an interesting question by a neurophysics student. And she was asking, to what extent can her generation, the millennials, Gen Z, and how can they advocate to the FCC to address the imperative of broadband freedom? How do you approach the FCC on this?
It's a long process. I think her name was Zoe, right? She,
yeah.
I mean, I think you have to be more specific than just broadband freedom. Look, as I said before, when I was at the FCC, we tried to preempt the states that were limiting broadband freedom, and a federal circuit court struck us down. And that doesn't, people could try again. I don't know whether this FCC is going to be brave enough to tackle it a second time. They'll probably use the excuse, well, we were told by the Sixth Circuit that we couldn't do this. That's why I think going to the FCC, even if I had gotten on the FCC, is not the right way to go here. It's to build in the communities, build at the state level, trying to get the federal government to, have some broad pronouncement of broadband freedom, and that includes the ability of communities to decide their broadband future, I think is going to be tough. That's not the way I would go.
Right, I understand. So it's basically grassroots. And so there's another question about, well, how can grassroots organizations, obviously with limited resources, be effective? And particularly with the introduction of these federal bills that are actually the industry's Christmas wish list, which is trying to take away the very successes that people have had so far and just chiseling them away. Is it just to continue our grassroots efforts, because ultimately it'll get to a critical tipping point where the industry is not going to win anymore?
Yeah, again, we have a lot of examples of bottom up, grassroots advocacy in this space that's been very successful. And again, find your hero, right? Maybe they're in the state legislature, maybe like Bob Wack, they're in the county council, maybe like in Bountiful City, they're in the city council. They all became heroes, particularly when the incumbents tried to take away, basically ruin the contract that they had with Utopia Fiber. They all became big advocates. So, I would say, build from the bottom up if you can. I'm sure in most communities with crummy broadband, you could find 25 people who want to make a change. And then you go to the city council or whatever the governing body is. And one of the things I would like to do at AAPB, and I'm not going to take credit for it because it's Kim's idea, is start a mentorship program between folks like her, like Utopia Fiber and other companies who've built these and have overcome the obstacles with those communities that want to build, to demonstrate, for example, how do you build community support? How do you pay for it? How do you build community support? are there folks we can partner with if we don't want to run it ourselves? If we do want to run it ourselves, how can, who can help us? Mm-hmm. So, but building community support, I think that's the first step. And then there are a bunch of processes you can go through, I think is wise to go through, because you don't want to give the incumbents any ammunition to, say, well, you didn't dot this I or cross this T. But we're actually going to put out a handbook probably the end of this month that's going to walk communities through how do you do this. And from there, I'd like to get to Kim's brainchild of a mentorship system, because like I said, she's already talking about how many counties did you say in California? 40 counties you're working with?
Only 40, only 40, just a little small thing. But no, I think that's a good point, Gigi. I think for those people who are grassroots, first of all, you can always reach out to me. I am always here. But talk to people who've done it. There's a lot of people out in every community who are focused on this. I think it's just rallying together. And this is a very small industry of a lot of people in the fiber industry, and make relationships because there's a lot of people who come before you who have a lot of expertise who can get you into the right conversations. Relationships, this is very much a relationship industry.
Absolutely. And mentoring is a great idea. What a great idea. And let us know when this handbook comes out, because we're going to be the first ones reading it and reviewing it. This is very important. And really, the progress has been incremental. We have made incremental progress. And it's just like what Margaret Mead says, it's just a few people who make a big difference. You don't need a lot of masses of people. You just need a number of people who are dedicated and who can do it and will slog this out. And we do have a lot of dedicated people in our movement who definitely want to see wired connections and not have these things outside of their windows. So
Odette, if I could put in a pitch for joining AEPB, governments can do it, ISPs can do it, individuals can do it. It's not expensive. But I think the more these community networks we get built, the harder it becomes for the incumbents to say they're failures, to give their other nonsense reasons for doing this, and to block them, because it becomes a thing. It becomes a thing that people do, and the successes are growing daily. So I have to do that as in my role as executive director. AAPB.us, there's a thing for membership, join. Please consider it. It would mean a lot to me.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic. I didn't even realize that. I saw that you had members, but I didn't realize that you could also have individual members and members from the Safe Technology movement as well. I think that's extremely important. And it would be really great if you all talked up the federal bills and tell your connections that they need to oppose some of these bills, because and we can talk offline about them, but they're actually running up against everything that we're doing on the local level. It's trying to put a broad swath across everything that we're doing, and basically eliminating what we're trying to do. So, so this has been a fantastic conversation, and I want to thank our distinguished panelists, Gigi Sohn, Kimberly McKinley, Timothy Schoechle, and I want to give a special mention to Mr. Clayton Banks for joining us during the Q&A session. And I want to thank everyone for participating in our town hall, Broadband Freedom of Choice for every city in the United States. Our next town hall number 5, will focus on cybersecurity. Thank you everyone for attending. We did get to many of the questions, not all the questions, but we did get to most of your questions. And I just want to see if anyone has any parting thoughts that they want to share with the audience.
I just want to say this is fantastic. The fact that you can get over 100 people in the middle of the day interested in these topics, I think that's something you can build on.
Absolutely.
And force of nature.
And I will close with this. I think this is from one of our UI or one of our chair people of one of our boards. He's a city manager and he's been a city manager for 25 years. And he's been on the board for the whole time. And he said, Kim, I thought Utopia was going to dictate my career of 30 years when we were in the bad years. And he said, no matter what else I did, Utopia was going to dictate it. Now his community is so thankful because of the fights that they did 20 plus years to get to this point. So it is not an overnight process. So even though you're not making the progress tomorrow, keep going because it is making a difference for your community, even though you don't feel like it some days. So,
absolutely.
But thank you, everyone.
Absolutely. And it's incremental progress over a consistent period of time and consistent progress. And that, I think, is the formula for success. Tim.
Well, I'd like to thank you, especially Odette, for putting this together. And I think it's been a terrific panel, brought out some stuff that I didn't even know about. So I look forward to the future sessions.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much. And I don't know I know Mr. Banks was traveling, so I don't know if he's accessible.
Well, all I want to say is I agree. This is one of the greatest, I think, conversations we've had about this issue. And I'm so happy that I was able to be on here. And everybody ought to take a read of the Internet Master Plan. It's about 38 pages. It's online, so take a look at it.
I worked on that. I'm very disappointed it's gone nowhere.
Well, you listen, me too.
and we're disappointed as well. We're very disappointed in that as well. So we will definitely take a look at that. And thank you very much, Gigi Sohn, Kimberly McKinley, Timothy Schoechle, and Clayton Banks, Mr. Clayton Banks. And thank you for participating in our town hall. And again, our next town hall number 5, we are having a series of these town halls. We're not going to stop now. And it's going to focus on cybersecurity. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you at our next town hall.